So I have a couple of slides that introduce myself first, because this audience is a bit mixed, and then I get into one specific topic, which hopefully this is the first presentation I give on this work, and we're really still scratching the surface of it. So hopefully here we'll get some feedback, and perhaps you can be useful to our research. So I'm a computer scientist, Maxi said, and I deal really with mobile systems and mobility models in particular. So going back a little bit, we have been doing works that involves devising and then tagging animals. This is a badger. The zoologists actually care about me saying that this badger is not dead. He's actually sleeping in this picture. And the other one is a sheep that we use as a test model. So when you start having data of this kind, you start having problems of very fine-grained temporal and spatial data sets that you want to analyze. So I got a little bit into analyzing networks. This is the network of the badgers moving between sets and latrines. Sets are burrows, latrines are places, boundaries. The role of latrines is not clear. We are analyzing this data to understand a little bit more about them. But then these are animals, and then these days people go around with a device that is much more powerful, and we can use to get more information about people and understanding their behavior. So this device here is really not just transmitting data, and I'm sure many of you are aware of all the studies using CDR, called data records of phone calls of people, so large data sets. But these devices also have a number of sensors that include accelerometer, magnetometer, GPS, so you know activity and location of people. And you start seeing applications, and this is one of our applications. This should be a map of the world. You probably can't see it. But the red dots are people who actually have installed our application. So we start having this sort of data available, and we start trying to make sense of people's behavior. And even if you don't push out your own application, this is data we got from a mobile phone application, again, that is out there. It's called Foursquare. And Foursquare users can push data into Twitter. And if you're used to Twitter data, this a specific type of Twitter data that also is geolocalized. And the different colors here indicate the different types of places that people visit. This is a map of New York. So at a specific time, you can see how many people are in what place. So you can start doing this sort of analysis. And this is the space I generally work in. Now for today, though, we don't talk about all these things. You can find all the papers there. We specifically talk about one very constrained study that uses this sort of tags. These are RFID tags, which people can wear, and we've used them into, there are many of these studies. I have a reference a bit later in a slide, so if you're interested in this sort of devices. I'm not talking about the technology much, because yes, this is one technology. There are many others coming up these days, and you can actually start using this in cooperation with many other localization technologies to make sense of how people behave even indoor. So this study is about the use of space indoors, about the use of buildings. So we considered an organization which was at the time moving, it's a research organization that was moving from one building to another, and wanted to study the impact of space in general onto people's interaction. And actually we came about this research by considering a book by Allen. And if you go back to the title of my talk, The Architecture of Innovation is part of the title of this book. And he essentially divides the interactions between people in three types. One is interaction for communication, interaction for information, interaction for inspiration, sorry. And we, in this particular work, we are trying to map which types of these interactions are affected by space. So that's where we're going. So the first hypothesis that we started working with was related to hierarchy. So research organizations, but general organizations often have a managerial, a sort of hierarchy in the way people are organized. And we wanted to understand if the vertical interaction, let's say, the hierarchy of this managerial, let's say, structure is somehow influencing the face-to-face interaction of people. So one thing you would imagine is that if you have a high degree, so if you are in a network, let's read this as a network, so your hierarchy graph is a network. If you have a high degree node, do we see that these people in reality interact with more people because there are also high-degree nodes in the interaction networks, for example. That's one of the things we have looked at. But then beyond the vertical aspect here, we also wanted to look at, so this hierarchy structure also has a horizontal kind of separation that separates the different groups in the organization. So, and in that sense, we looked at different groups and looked at how space was influencing their interaction. And here again, you have networks between groups, between people. And we have, in this particular case, we have a network in one building and a network, again, with the same people in another building. The third aspect that we looked at was, well, now we've seen that perhaps space might have an influence. Can we also discriminate which kind of spaces, which kind of places have different influence on the type of interaction? And we said we have, it could be communication, but it could be inspiration. And one of the things we read in this Allen's book was that, serendipitous encounters. If you are a researcher, you meet someone at the printer, and all of a sudden you start a very deep conversation about something, and you really haven't scheduled that. So how do we make it happen? How do we make it better? Is this really happening? Are we fostering the interaction, this type of interaction, by the space that is available? So one thing that, in fact, this research organization was planning was they were introducing more food and drink meeting areas in the new building. And so one of the things when we went to talk to them, we got feedback on, well, can you check if this has at all had an effect into our organization? So this is kind of the questions that we looked at, and we looked at the data. So the deployments. So we had, this wasn't a big study, and that's why I said this is initial somehow. So it was 2 weeks, so again, not a long study, in each of the buildings. And we took the second study after a while. So the people in the building had been there for a while, and then we started, we let them settle, and then we got the data. I should also note, by the way, here, you see there is a link to the type of technology we used. These tags log the contacts when, not just on themselves, they essentially log their location, the fact that they had encountered each other on a receiver tag. Let's say you have to cover the area that you want to instrument all with these receivers, which you can imagine could be like a Wi-Fi base station. So you need to have this base station in the area you want to monitor people. And we covered 3 floors in the 2 buildings with a number of base stations. So what I'm going to present now are the results of the analysis that we've done over this, let's say, 3 groups of research questions that I just introduced. So the first one, if you remember what I said about hierarchy, we have a hierarchical management structure, and we wanted to see if the people who had a high degree in the management structure also had a high degree in the interaction network somehow. So we looked at, this is a simplified, I would say, representation of the management structure. Leave the colors aside, but the colors are, in fact, what we will, in the next set of slides, consider as the 3 different groups under consideration. And so what we find is essentially that there is not significant correlation between the degree in the management structure and in the contact graphs. And this was kind of in line with, we've interviewed some researchers in the building, and they essentially said, well, this management structure, the managers really don't want this management structure to make sense. We want the interactions between the researchers quite flat. There's a push to not really consider this management structure more than for very formal occasions. And somehow we do see this aspect. However, while the vertical enforcement of the management structure doesn't have an influence, we then went on and considered the group structure. So the horizontal interaction, the horizontal structure somehow, the fact that there are groups there, was quite evident in our data. So when we went to look at interactions and space, we we looked at, on the y-axis here, you have the percentage of contacts intergroup contacts. So you saw these were the 3 groups, and those are the bars indicate how many intergroup contacts there are between the groups in the old building and in the new building. And one thing that is evident from just this graph is that we have more, right? And I could stop here. But perhaps you will understand much better once I explain the semantics of this graph, and then you'll agree with me that there is something there. So on the x and y axis, you have all the IDs of the people that were in the study. Notice that there are a bit less than the initial number I said. This is because here we're only considering the people that are in both buildings. So some people were actually interns in the first building, so they left. So here are the people that we had and we could consider. So if you, on the diagonal, of course, you don't have any dark areas, because this is, if you met yourself, you would have a dark there. So this is a graph that says how much you've met, so how much person 10 has met person 9. And then you put a square there. So what you see in the first building is that the graph is quite clustered. And the blue lines in the graph are the different groups, the different divided groups that we have. There are more interaction outside the groups. So this is what this means, right? So there, the interactions are within the groups. They're really clustered. I should have probably said the organization of these numbers is by groups. So 0 to 7 is one group, 7 to 12 is another group, and 12 to 20 is another group. So what you see is a remarkable difference. One of the studies we did was to use community detection in 2 ways. This is the next graph. This is using a k-click community detection, Pala et al. And what we're doing here is take the interactions, so the data coming from RFID tags, apply a community detection mechanism, and look at the proportion of the same group, the edges that are in the same group inside. So considering the different groups that were defined. And what we find is that in the old building, there was more defined community. So there was more adhering, more overlap between, overlap is a word that I shouldn't use, but between the community detection results and the original grouping of the groups. So this means that somehow the new building has fostered collaboration intergroup more than intragroup, which is, well, according to this organization, a good thing. This is another study, again confirmed. We looked at modularity, for those of you who are familiar with community detection mechanism, with Louvain and considered modularity. So the modularity in the old building was much higher. So here we're breaking, the new building is kind of breaking the communities, and we see it in the data. The other aspect we looked at is once we know that the space seemed to have had an effect, we looked at smaller things, the impact of floor, the impact of different areas, the impact of the category of the areas that were meaningful. So in the table here, you see the list of the groups that we had and on which floor they were sitting. So you can see that in the old building, group A and C were on floor 1, and group B was on floor 2, and instead, group A and B are now on floor 3, and group C is on floor 1. I don't want you to remember this. You'll see that in the next slide. Anyway, there were 2 groups in the same floor before, and then 2 groups after, but this was different. We have a measure here, which is a normalized measure of number of contacts between groups. So we take all the contacts between groups A and B, for example, and we normalize by the number of possible contacts that you can have between the groups. And by using that, we build a picture. 2 pictures again, old building and new building. Different colors mean different places. So they have a cafeteria, they have meeting rooms, offices, and public places, and other places which we aggregated. The red color, on the x-axis, you find the different groups, that measure for group A and C, group A and B. The colors here indicate that A and C are now on the same group. So green means on the same floor in that building. And red means on different floors. What we see here is that in the old building, A and C were on the same floor. They were really collaborating and interacting a lot. In the new building, they're still doing it, although they've been split. They're now on different floors. the interaction between A and B, which are now on the same floor, has increased substantially. But one interesting consequence is B and C have never been on the same floor and still are not on the same floor. But as a consequence of the fact that now A and B are collocated, there is, we think, and we've tried to talk to them about that, a second order effect in increasing the number of interactions between B and C, just as a consequence of the fact that A and B are on the same floor. This comes with a caveat. This study was done for 2 weeks, 3 months after they moved, so it might be that some settling process is still going on, and this might change. But this is what we saw, and somehow, you know, even if it changes, is a result and is a way of analyzing this sort of data. There's a cafeteria in the new building, which wasn't in the old building. And so you consider the context in the new building and in the old building. So with or without lunchtime, in the old building, there's not much difference. People were eating in the office. And in the new building, it looks like the contacts were really kind of more meaningful with the lunchtime. This is even more evident if I give you again the picture that I've given you before. So here you see that in the old building, with or without lunchtime, the pictures look very similar, right? This is the old building, with or without lunchtime, same picture. New building, with or without lunchtime, you see some density added here, in fact, across groups. So the lunch cafeteria seemed to work, seemed to allow people to interact. We've also done a study that kind of splits, shows how people split their time. And again, evidence of the effect of the cafeteria interactions is this blue, big blue dot here, which was a bit different here somehow. This is a result of seminars and meetings that were happening between the groups. And so you can start analyzing what's happening here. At the moment, we haven't done more than this, but that's probably coming. Again, the splitting of different kind of breaking down of 7% of the new building interactions are in food areas, meeting rooms is kind of decreased because now they're meeting somewhere else. And office time. So I think we suspect that they were eating in meeting rooms before. So that's where we got. So limitations. We have pre and post, which is kind of interesting, but it's kind of limited in time and it's limited in space. We want to do a bigger study, and we're actually setting off to do that. And it'd be interesting to correlate with other data. So HR data, office arrival data, communication, and other personal data, as well as other devices. We've used only one type of device, but as a computer scientist, I'm the first to say, well, we should add this and that. And I have a way, and I think we're going to do that. But then the next step, of course, is that you can feed this all back to the user. You can start building applications that suggest things to the user. And of course, numerous tools for analysis of performance, which I don't want to get into, are much more interesting user experience than that. The bold paper is the one that is coming out in September, and that contains the main aspects of what I explained. And the other paper is a more general paper about the study in a single building of the behavior patterns in user space of people of different cultures. And again, that is already on my webpage. The other one is not yet. OK, thank you.
That was a really interesting talk. When I was an undergraduate in the Cavendish laboratory, physics, they always said to me that it was great because there was a cafeteria, so all the groups would talk. And all the groups sat together in the same tables, but on one table was the superconductivity group, on one table was the polymer group, and on the other table was the... And they never talked to each other, so they spent a lot of time together. Then I went to the Clarendon in Oxford, and they said, oh no, we've got a much smaller cafeteria. And there was the superconductivity group and the polymer group, and they were just more scrunched together. So is it, my question is, you're measuring interactions, but you're not necessarily measuring collaboration, are you?
So that's a very good question. For the kind of way these RFID tags are working, they're put on the chest, and therefore they're really measuring face to face, to the point that we had a problem. Like, I knew I was in a meeting room with a couple of people, and the tags, when we tested them, were measuring perhaps only me meeting one person because I was facing them and not the other person. So, they would have spotted the case when you're having lunch with your group, and the other group is perhaps adjacent or somewhere else, because of the way your body kind of seems to screen. But we're penalized on the other side, so we had to do some transitive closure on the tag. So my tag was seeing Max's tag, and Max's tag was seeing Twist tag, and perhaps we had some way of localizing, so we could say we were kind of in the same room. So we had to add, because it was so penalizing in the other direction. But that's just one technology, but it's a good point.
Hi. I wanted, as I was listening to you, I remembered a book that I wanted to propose to you because it contains a historical example of what you're describing. It's called Idea Factory, and it's about Bell Laboratories, perhaps the largest concentration of innovation ever.
Yes, I know.
And many of the technology we know today, including the one you're using, probably originated there. And there's a passage there in which they say when they became successful enough and they built a new building, they built a corridor of about 700 feet, that all physicists wanting to go to have lunch would have to go through there. And the author describes this intentionally as a physicist would like a magnet attracting filings while going there, and the filings would be problems, ideas, questions, colleagues, and so on. So it may be something to look at. I'm sure there's data there.
So the Bell Lab example, I should have mentioned, I think we mentioned in the paper, is a very famous research lab example where they really were building in this sense. I believe here we're trying to give a bit more technological perspective over that. But definitely, yeah, the history is there. Yeah.
Any further question?
Can you go back and say, it looks like you met with, so 12 met with 13. Can you go back and say, what was that interaction like? What was the experience like or something? Yeah,
I'm not sure. So you would have to do it almost every day, or at least one thing we did for another study was to correlate with a calendar. So if you correlate with my calendar, you know who was in my office roughly at what time, and in theory, how long we met. If you mean that you can ask people to confirm.
I was just thinking about the quality of the interaction in terms of can they specify the quality of the interaction?
So just to clarify, we've only done the study through data coming from the sensors. We don't know any ground truth for anything that I've shown you. So I would have to go back and ask them, is it really true you met with this person for this amount of time? And I suspect, unless you do it every couple of days, and that's a lot of data that one has to check, you might not. So I'm saying, yes, you can do it, but it's very cumbersome to do for long periods.